if you can't understand them, it shouldn't be legal with the little seal of approval. I think we've seen this with the derivatives and these fancy exotic. It's gambling, pure and simple gambling, and it hasn't been regulated. But in some ways, it's sort of under the guise of legality. So it has been done without regulation, and what we have seen is some people have gotten so carried away with the hedge funds, this gambling aspect, and when you can create money out of thin air and there's no real restrictions about how much money you could create. I don't know if you remember, Fisk, I think you're too young, but back in the 20s when they had the big financial heist and people were betting money that they didn't have in the stock market, and you had to have maybe, a penny on the dollar that you borrowed to start buying stock, and people would buy on margin. So people thought, oh wow, I'm making so much money, but then if the stock went down, all of a sudden they were greatly in debt, and people were jumping off of buildings. They were just completely wiped out financially when the stock market went the wrong way.
That happened to my grandfather.
Right. So the same thing is happening with the hedge funds. You have these colossal losers, and there's no way they can begin to pay their gambling debts. And then you have these people who've made these astronomical winnings. And who is creating the money to back these, ridiculous, outrageous debts? And this is why I think the financial crisis happened, and they were so unspecific about needing to get this huge amount of money from Congress, just a big, giant number. And they wanted to get enough money to pay off the gamblers who'd made the bad debts so that they would be able to buy up everybody else's stuff and still be in the game. You had people go under. There were a lot of debts that spread around, but you had winners and you had losers. So it was who got the money would be a winner, and who didn't get the money would be a loser. So whether you came out as a winner or a loser depended on whether you got the money, and who was in charge of deciding who got the money and who went belly up. You had Goldman Sachs, you had Geithner, you had Bernanke, and they made decisions which determined who were the winners and who were the losers. And I can tell you that there were some big winners, there were some big losers, but the biggest losers of all were the American people and the rest of the world, because the money went to the banks, to the big gamblers and the players. It didn't go to the people who had gotten sucked in, who had had their homes mortgages, who had taken out loans. All those people were losers. And what happened when they started having the government buy up the toxic assets, it was a way of simply privatizing the profits and socializing the losses. So by saddling the countries with these colossal debts, it meant that then the people who had the money could privatize the national assets and buy up the stuff and the homes and the properties and the banks that weren't doing so well, that didn't get the bailout money, for pennies on the dollar. And that's what we saw. And that's why people are upset in Greece, in Iceland, in Italy, throughout the world, because their governments, to varying degrees, became indebted. And that's one of the reasons that we need to create our own money too, is we can't have a debt-based economy. Every time you have a debt-based economy, money comes into existence through the act of borrowing. So if you paid back all the debts, there's still not enough money, because they didn't create the money that is required to pay the interest. So it always concentrates wealth and power, and it can never be paid back. That's why they always talk about economic growth. economic growth isn't necessarily a good thing. If you have an expanding economy, it's just impossible in a finite system to have an infinitely growing economy. So that's why you do have recessions, you do have depressions. It just can't grow infinitely. And every time you have an empire with a debt-based system, what has happened is you have this tremendous concentration of wealth and power. And usually it is that 1%. But what usually happens with empires, they destroy their ecological base. And then the empire collapses. Unfortunately, that's the whole planet right now. And the whole planet is threatened by this. We see the oceans under stress. We see the forest under stress. We see our water, our food system. Everything is under stress. Everything is under assault. You can't, even if you could convert the whole planet into money, what good is it going to do you, a dead planet? If you poison the air, you poison the water, you poison the food, you kill off the fish, you kill off the oceans. Is anybody going to be happy with just a lot of money? It's not real wealth. Real wealth is a healthy body, healthy relationships with your family, a healthy community, healthy relationship with nature, healthy oceans, forests, healthy air, good water to drink. That's your real wealth. And if you look at the global economy, the biggest part of the economy is the invisible economy. It's the gifts of nature, the unpaid services of nature, which actually sustain life. And then on top of that, you have the love economy. That's mothers raising kids. You have communities helping one another. You have the network volunteers. That's a huge part. Then on top of that economy, you have the exchange economy, which is dependent on the gifts of nature, on the gifts of women, on the gifts of community and our natural good nature cooperativeness. I mean, human beings are social animals. We care about each other. That's why when somebody says, "I'm lost, can you help me?" people always will stop and empathize and help people. That's just sort of a part of human nature. And the exchange economy, that money economy, in some ways it's a sort of a destructive, parasitical economy, and it depends upon everything else to function. And when we see the exchange economy break down, we see at the same time right now this real hunger for community.